Do you see a shadow moving in the night? He carves a path through the fog. In the cool air, the wet grass, as the sky prepares to break into morning. A shadow is moving. A shadow is running. He runs with a vicious stride and desperate countenance, frenzy and fear. Do you see it? A second shadow, his stride equally as vicious and countenance equally as desperate. It's a chase. He's gaining. He's closing. He reaches for him, and they fall in the grass. There's a struggle on the ground. Now silence. I want to be alone, Sadier said, catching his breath. Leave me alone, Adrian. Why'd you follow me out here? You don't want to be alone, Adrian replied. You came here on purpose. You didn't deceive me. I know why you're here. There are bones off that ledge. The bones of the broken-hearted, of those who gave up. You came here to give up. That's ridiculous, Sadier answered. I just want to be alone. Leave me, please. Your presence is painful to me. I won't leave you, Adrian replied. Billowing clouds became visible as darkness turned into dusk. The birds started singing melodies. The fog grew thinner and dissolved away. There were woods to the south, a prairie as far as the eye could see to the north and west, and a sharp cliff and an abyss to the east. Adrian sat, clutching Sadier's wrist tightly as Sadier lay on the ground. The entirety of Sadier's eye was black. Darkness seeped from his form. Several times Adrian was nearly overwhelmed by it, a powerfully uncomfortable feeling sweeping over him. But every time he would recollect himself and clench his teeth until it passed. Suddenly, Adrian felt the warm presence of Sela, who was approaching slowly from behind. Adrian sighed in relief, feeling his emotions begin to realign. Sela walked in front of them and sighed, looking down at Sadier with an expression that was part thoughtful and part compassionate. How dare you, Mr. Bradley, Sadier growled. Sela reached into his coat and moved cautiously towards Sadier. He pulled out 2 cuffs connected by a rope. He put a hand on Sadier's forehead and said a peaceful spell so that Sadier wouldn't struggle. Then he locked one of the cuffs to Sadier's right wrist and the other to Adrian's left. Sadier had 6 feet of leash. The edge of the cliff was about 40 feet away. All Adrian had to do now was sit because he was significantly bigger than Sadier. Sela put a hand on Adrian's knee and then rose. "I'll be back," he said. "Abigail is here, though." A blue truck was rumbling to a stop behind them. Sela went to Abigail and said something to her. Then he departed. Abigail sat in front of Adrian and Sadier with her legs bent and her hands folded on her knees. She gazed off into the vast prairie, her yellow hair drifting in the wind, a tragic expression in her green eyes. Adrian looked down at the ground and pulled blades of grass with his free hand. Sadier wore a glassy look as his black eyes stared into nothing, but his muscles relaxed just a bit when Abigail arrived. Not a word was said by anyone as the sun slowly peeked over the horizon, sending out gloriously colorful streaks of red and orange. Finally, Abigail sighed softly and looked at Sadier intently for several minutes. She moved towards him and put a finger on his chest, saying, "Listen to me." He put up a fuss at her touching him. She said, "Listen to me," 5 more times until he finally stopped squirming. When he was still, she said the words her brother had said to her as the train was rushing over their heads. "Don't give up." She stared into his eyes dramatically until he finally looked down. "I don't care," Sadier replied. "I know," Abigail answered. "And you know I know," she said. "But if you jump off the ledge, you will fall and you will hit the bottom and you will sink into the earth and never return. You will never see another day. You will never see her again." There was silence for a long time again. After about a half hour, a wiry figure approached from the west. He walked a little squirrely, his hands in his blue jeans. It was Lakish. He joined them but didn't say anything. He stood gazing at the sky beyond the cliff, his back to Sadier. Eventually, he spoke. "You're going to see her again. It may be years, but I promise you the day will come when you will rise to the clouds and she will be there waiting. Her eyes will be teary and she will say, 'I missed you.' And she will hug you and this heartache will melt away." Then Lakish turned and squatted down in front of Sadier and said, "Don't throw your life away. Invest in the forever. Live for the day you die." Then he rose and started walking in the direction from which he came, his hands back in his pockets. They were uncharacteristically uplifting words from the student captain, who was very reserved in most cases, broken and trying to mend from his tumultuous past. Next to come rising over the prairie were Wendy and Ethan. Abigail frowned as she recognized them. The new recruits from the green team were not who she had anticipated would visit next, and she was worried they had come on their own accord. "Sadier, I'm so sorry," Wendy said, hurrying up to the trio. "It's going to be all right. She's in a better place now. She's all right, and you're going to be all right too." She went to her knees and hugged him. Sadier erupted like a volcano and lashed out at Wendy, verbally and physically attacking her. Wendy screamed and backed away. Ethan tried to calm her as she held her arm tenderly and looked at Sadier with confusion and sadness in her soft blue eyes. A few moments later, a van bounced towards them and parked next to Abigail's truck. Sela and Reuben got out and started making their way towards Sadier. Wendy went to Sela and said, "He attacked me." "There's a cherry plant activated inside him," Sela replied quietly. "I'm sorry he hurt you. Why don't you radio Riley and have him come pick you up?" Abigail rose and went to Sela. "You're not going to try to move him, are you?" she said. "We were talking about it," Sela replied, "but I don't think that would be wise," he said, looking at Sadier, who was still breathing rapidly following his outlash. Quite some time passed, and Sadier didn't seem to be simmering down. His black eyes were still wide, and his breathing remained short and quick. Adrian's fortitude was tiring. Reuben decided to address Sadier. The senior was a big kid with a soft voice and a soft heart. He sat down in front of Sadier. Sadier and Reuben stared into each other's eyes for a moment, and then Reuben said, "Do you know how special of a kid you must be to have the enemy target you like this? To use an Omicron on you as an 8th grader? Do you realize what they see in you? They're terrified to see what you will become. They don't want to have to fight you for 4 more years. You're reckless, but you always want to do the right thing. You're tough as nails, but compassionate. You're independent, but loyal. We need you, Sadier. We need you in the Alma. We need you in this school. Don't give up, Sadier. That's what they want. Because you're going to strike the gates of hell." Sadier's breathing started to steady. Reuben and Sela left. Wendy and Ethan hadn't called their leader, but Sela gave them a ride to the school. At the school, everyone was talking about Sadier with concerned tones. Many wanted to visit and try to encourage him, but after Wendy, Sela demanded that he decide who would visit Sadier. It was noon. Abigail and Adrian chatted a little to keep in good spirits. Reuben brought them lunch with his teammate Valerie, who was Abigail's best friend. Sadier didn't eat anything. Reuben and Valerie remained as hours passed by. No one touched Sadier. Rarely did anyone look at him. They gave him space and hoped the cherry plant would fade before nightfall. About 5, a visitor came. It was Priscilla, the new recruit on Reuben's team. She approached slowly. "Did Sela ask you to come?" Abigail asked. She nodded yes. Then she got on her knees and started sliding towards Sadier very slowly. "What are you doing?" Adrian whispered. "Just let me," she replied. She put a hand on Sadier's shoulder and then hugged him. Everyone was stunned that he didn't even slightly react. She held him in her arms for a long time, and the blackness in his eyes began to recede. It had taken Sela hours of searching, but he eventually determined that Priscilla would be able to do this. This was good because night crept closer, and no one knew what would happen if Sadier fell asleep. But now something seemed better. The 5 of them talked quietly and waited patiently, hoping for the best. Around 8, as the sun set, Sela returned and talked through options with Adrian. Sela was motivated to move Sadier somewhere so that Adrian didn't have to stay the night with him out there. But Adrian was clear in expressing that he was very willing. Adrian said he thought that patience remained their best weapon, even if it was through the night. So they did stay the night. No one left. 40 feet from the cliff where Adrian had tackled Sadier, they made their bed. Some of them slept in vehicles for parts of the night. The night was more uneventful than expected. Sadier didn't sleep much. When he did, Sela was waiting. He mostly locked down Sadier's dreams with an extremely powerful gamma reaction. Still, Alkador was able to seep in just a bit at one point and unsettle Sadier significantly just before morning. When Sadier awoke, his eyes were still his own, but he had clearly taken a turn for the worse. He was overcome by fear, his body shaking slightly. He got up and made a mad dash at one point, perhaps heading for the ledge, but then hit the edge of the rope. Adrian planted himself and didn't let Sadier go any further. Following that, the second day was much like the first. People occasionally came to encourage Sadier. Over the course of the day, Abigail asked him 3 times, "Are you ready to go home?" But Sadier didn't reply, so they kept waiting. Around 1, Sadier asked Abigail, "Where's my father? Why hasn't he come?" To this, Abigail didn't reply and gestured so that no one else would reply, because she knew why Adrian's godfather hadn't come. As Sadier's team leader, Sela had told her at the start of the year the secret of the mysterious man that was Sadier's godfather. She knew when he came, he would tell Sadier the truth. It was a mind-blowing secret, a loving secret, but one he wanted to be sure Sadier was ready to handle. At some point, he would come, but for now, he kept his distance. It was 7 when he came. A rough-looking truck bounced to a stop. A man hopped out and strode towards them. Sadier's godfather was a striking man with broad shoulders and a muscular build. He had a heavy beard and dark, deep-set eyes. Breathing rather heavily, he came and stood looking down at Sadier. "Saymi's dead," Sadier reported to him. "I know," the man nodded. "You knew from the start what me and Saymi were doing," Sadier guessed. "Yes," his godfather replied. "Of course I did." "How'd you know?" Sadier asked. "I'm good friends with Sila," he replied. Sadier was shocked. "You know Sila?" "Yes, Sadier, I've known Sila since long before Waterfall Academy," he replied. Sadier couldn't believe his ears and suddenly felt betrayed. "Do you really work at the factory?" he asked. "Yes, of course I do," his godfather replied. "During the day." "And during the night?" Sadier asked. "I've been with you, watching over you," the man replied. "What do you mean?" Sadier asked. "In the upper world?" "I help out as much as I can," he replied. Sadier looked down at the ground trying to understand. Then he rose his head slowly and glared at his godfather. "You planned for us to be in the Alma. That's why you took us here when my parents died." His words were probably angrier than he realized. "That's why we moved to the settlement. You wanted me and Saymi for the Alma. Aren't you even sad that she's dead?" "Yes, of course I am," the man replied, tears beginning in his dark eyes. "I tried so hard to save her, but I couldn't." "Ani!" Sadier exclaimed. "You're Ani!" Sadier was stunned. He could barely take it. Ani, the legendary warrior angel, the most formidable force in Sila's army, Sila's best friend, and the man Sadier had called Dad since he was 3 were one and the same. "Is it common for angels to raise children?" Sadier asked. "No," Ani replied. "It's extremely uncommon." But there was no option. Now you know why I could never talk about where I was born or what it was like for me growing up. I was born on the surface of Ainley. Sila and I were childhood friends. We fought in a war together. We died old and full of stories. He passed on just before me. When I passed, I found him traveling the stars. We joined with several others and decided the surface of Switzi would be where we would take up the battle against the enemy who worked against the people there. I met your father there. He was awakened when he was young, just like you, and for many years, as he slept, he worked with us to combat our opponent and steer dreamers. He was a reckless, passionate man, but he had a tender spirit. We were getting in over our heads, battling for a gathering that was falling apart, and one terrible night, we couldn't protect him or your mother either. They were both struck within a few minutes of each other. Your mother passed quickly, but your father lingered for a moment. "Don't keep them safe," were his final words to me. I knew what he meant. He was talking about you and Saymi. Sometimes he would say life isn't a problem to be solved, but a game to be played. He was a reckless man, but I never met anyone more alive. At the time, your parents were on a long trip in an effort to get closer to the opponent, so you and Saymi didn't have anyone to care for you. There was no friend or relative who knew where you were or that your parents were gone. I had to do something. I decided to take you to your Aunt Terry, who was well off and would gladly take you in. She would have said an angel must have saved you, and you would be her own. I started to take you there, but your father's last words were haunting me. I knew you and Saymi growing up with his sister would have been the last thing he wanted. It would have been an easy life. Sila had already decided to go to the settlement and take a stand against Alkador in response to Waterfall Academy, and I had already decided to go with him. My only other option was to take you with me. I couldn't give you to anyone once we got there, because they would wonder and trace you back to your aunt. So I raised you. I put you in kindergarten at Waterfall Academy. I could tell, even before your parents died, that you had stunning potential, and Saymi too, but especially you. I've waited so long for this year. I'm sad to see it end for Saymi, but I'm happy to see her go free. I'm so sorry, Sadier. I understand only now you saw it coming from a long time ago, and we're trying desperately to save her. It makes the pain worse. I know your heart is breaking, but I know in you there is a desire to keep fighting, to come back with fury and strike Alkador for Saymi, and for everyone he's hurt, and for every heart he's wounded. He's trying to hide that desire from you, but you have to find it. You have to rise up from these ashes. Sadier didn't react. He sat motionless, expressionless. Around 8, Sila began to grow nervous, with night approaching yet again. Though it appeared that Sadier was slowly moving in the right direction, from some investigating, he began to perceive that if something wasn't done, the coming night would be very unfavorable. So Sila decided to be reckless and explain to Sadier what was really going on. From what Letty said when he cherry planted you, you've probably already figured out who you are, Sila said to Sadier. You're the student captain your senior year. That's if we can stay on this timeline. And not only that, you have the potential to be a guide, a true guide, like Joseph was. One who can take a friend by the hand and lead them out of reaction, out of Alkador's grasp, and out of the grave. Against this, Alkador has no power. And Alkador's stronghold has become weak, especially with our victory this year. If you rise up, you will be the puzzle piece we need to take the castle, establish our reign in this school, and send Alkador on the defensive. You can talk to those who dream, Sadier. They understand you. Do you know how valuable that is? No one has been able to do that since Joseph. Joseph saved dozens of lives and gave us a fighting chance in this school. We've made the most of it and put Alkador on his heels, but we've been stalling for years waiting for the final blow, waiting for another like Joseph. You will be the final blow. You can't do it alone. You will be part of a skilled team each and every year, and you will have to submit to authority for a long time, but eventually your time will come to lead, and you will lead us out of this dark age. No more depression, no more bullying, no more suicide. Do you see why Alkador did this? He's already lost, but he's trying to alter the timeline from 4 years in the future when you defeated him. He's using the one thing he has on you, your sister's death your first year. For it struck you hard, but you bounced back and struck him harder. He's trying to change the story. Do you realize it? This year didn't go like this the first time. You learned to love your sister like you never had in this year, but it wasn't a terrorizing experience. He's changed this year so that instead of caring for her, you fretted over her. The Omicron kept us from seeing it, but he constructed a recursion in which he made you see gravestones and knew you would look into the names. From his perspective in the future, he was able to tell you every individual who would die this year, and he mixed it all with an aggressive gamma reaction that we were also not allowed to see. It never left you so that you would be sure to respond anxiously. In the end, it all summed up to a fear of losing Saymi, which he knew would indeed happen at the end of the year. It's not like you to fear, Sadier. The doctrine clicked for you fast and gave you a foundation of courage, your faith unshakable. But he's changed that and tried to make you something you're not. Reuben jumped to his feet and caught Sila as he went unconscious. Sila had started to sweat blood. To explain Alkador's attack on the timeline, he had to endure incredible pressure and risk greatly damaging his body in the lower dimension. Sila remained in the upper world for over a month as he recovered below, all the while angels frantically trying to figure out how to cover up his absence with reactions. Reuben left to hide Sila's body in an upper chamber at the school. Sadier didn't react very much, but it was clear he was deep in thought, his mind perhaps finally moving outside Alkador's attack. The sun disappeared below the prairie. Abigail took a chance and hugged Sadier goodnight. He didn't get upset, though. She figured there was a good chance it was the last time she would see him in this life. All slept except Adrian and Sadier, who remained awake without saying a word. Adrian was exhausted. At about 11, Sadier whispered to Adrian. Sila couldn't establish the gamma, could he? Adrian whispered, "Sadier, Sila, Sila, Sila." Sila couldn't establish the gamma, could he? Adrian whispered, "Sadier, Sila, Sila, Sila." Sila couldn't establish the gamma, could he? Adrian whispered, "Sadier, Sila, Sila, Sila." Adrian shook his head no. So if I fall asleep, I'm dead, Sadier said. Adrian nodded. Are you going to try to keep me awake? Sadier asked. No, Adrian replied. Not this time. Your faith is back. I'm here for you, whatever you want to do. If you want to stay awake, I'll stay up with you. But if you want to fall asleep, then I'll fall asleep too, and I'll see you in the stars. I think I'll fall asleep now, Adrian, Sadier said. He lay down in the grass. Do you think Saymi is there? He said, looking up at the stars. She's there, Adrian replied. Do you want to go to her? Yeah, I think so, Sadier replied. I think I'll fall asleep now, Adrian. Good night, he said. I'll see you again someday. Good night, Sadier, Adrian replied. See you again someday. Abigail awoke just as the first ray of sunlight reached out. She was out of her truck in half a second, her heart pounding. Through the darkness, she spotted the outline of Sadier's body laying in the grass. She put her hand over her mouth and started crying. But as she walked closer, she saw his arm move and realized he was still alive. They had stayed awake the whole night. Adrian said throughout the night Sadier would lay down, and every time Adrian assumed it was over. But a few minutes later, Sadier would sit back up. I sure wish I wasn't here, Sadier said when he saw Abigail. Yeah, I know, Abigail replied. She reached in her pocket and pulled out the key to Sadier's cuff that Sela had given to her. She unlocked his wrist from the restraint. He stood up and walked briskly to the ledge. He looked off for a moment and then turned around. Are you going to stay with us? Adrian asked, still sitting. Sadier shrugged. Well, it's good that you know, because the cherry plant is still in you, and we can't keep you away from the upper world forever, Adrian said, rising. Come with me. Sela wants you. Where are we going? Sadier asked. To Galaxy Waterfall, Adrian replied. Abigail hugged him, again knowing that it could be the last time she would see him. Reuben, Valerie, and Priscilla did the same. Sadier and Adrian climbed into one of the vehicles and headed north in the direction of the school, but they traveled beyond the school and halted at a brook. Adrian hopped out and walked to the brook. Sadier followed him curiously. The school was visible to the south. Woods curled around them to the north and the east. The prairie was to the west. This is Galaxy Waterfall? Sadier asked, looking at the transparent water sparkling through the brook. It's a little bigger on the other side, Adrian said humorously. Are you ready for a nap? Aren't they going to kill me once I get there? Sadier asked. If you go into the waterfall, it will buy you a few minutes, Adrian replied. Beyond that, Sela has a plan to try to save you, but it's a bit of a Hail Mary. Well, let's do it, Sadier said, laying down. Hopefully it won't work. I hear you, man, Adrian replied. It felt amazing to finally relax. Sadier's soul was in the upper world even before his body fell asleep. He jumped, startled to find the waterfall thundering about 15 feet in front of him. His feet were in the pool of water that gathered below the fall. But it wasn't water. It looked like darkness and starlight. It was like miles and miles of outer space were pouring over the ledge high above them and crashing at their feet. You said inside the waterfall? Sadier asked. How do I go inside it? There's a cave behind it, Adrian replied. You'll find Sela there. Sadier slowly walked towards the fall. If I don't see you again for many years, then blessings to you, Adrian said. Blessings to you too, Sadier said, and then plunged into the fall. His senses were overloaded with powerful vibrations and echoing flashes, but then he moved beyond the fall into the cave behind and found himself quietly floating in the air. He realized that the gravity was very weak. The cave's walls were damp, and on the floor were little pools of galaxy. Sadier couldn't see far ahead, but he maneuvered down the long cave, sometimes pushing off the ceiling and the walls. There was a fork in the cave, but one of the ways was a side pocket, and that's where Sadier found Sela sitting on the ground. A strange vase was smoking in front of him. "I'm glad you're with us," Sela said, rising. Sadier shrugged. "Maybe if you can keep me here," he said. "We'll give it a shot," Sela answered. "I'm going to hide you." "They won't find me here?" Sadier asked. "Yes, they'll find you here, but this isn't where I'm wanting to hide you," Sela replied. "I'm going to hide you across the wall. It's the only place they won't find you." "What do you mean?" Sadier asked, a little shocked. "You're going to kill me?" "Yes, temporarily, but then I'll bring you back, or at least I'll try. It's the only way I can think to keep you from them," Sela said. "And while you're there, I'll try to extract the cherry plant from your soul, so that when you return, you'll be free. You're going to see Saymi." "But you told us never to interact with those who have passed," Sadier said. "But you will be passed too," Sela replied. "Lay down right here, it won't hurt." Sadier laid his back on the ground. Sela put a hand on Sadier's chest. He picked up the smoking vase and said, "This will allow you to come back. Inhale it." He held it close to Sadier's nose, and Sadier breathed in the strange smoke. "You'll know when I'm trying to bring you back, but you'll have to choose to come to me. Hope to see you soon. Sweet travels, my friend," Sela said. Sela's hand on Sadier's chest grew warm and then hot. Sadier clenched his teeth from the power of it. Then he started floating. He rose up ever so slowly and looked down at his body and at Sela. Sela looked up and gave him a wink. Sadier saw Sela waste no time in cutting open his soul to begin the task of carefully removing the cherry plant. He passed beyond the rock of the cave. He saw the waterfall and the castle. Then he traveled backwards through everything he had journeyed through with his team in the last year. He recognized the prairies and the mountains and the rivers. Then he went beyond where he had been, beyond the atmosphere and into strange places. Strange colors. Such dazzling landscapes. So bizarre. So inspiring. He forgot where he was and what he was doing, and fell asleep in a thicket. He awoke very slowly a long time later, and rose his back off the grass. He moved out of the thicket, and crawled across the clovers to the bank of a pool. He put his hand in the water and drank from it. A large purple bird came swooping down and rested in a very small tree beside him. Light came through the trees, making the water sparkle mysteriously. Sadier wasn't wearing anything, and neither was the one approaching him. It was Saymi, stepping lightly through the trees towards him. She stood radiantly on the other side of the pool now, a beaming smile on her face. Saymi giggled and ran to Sadier and hugged him. "You made it! You're here! We're here together," she said. Sadier smiled, so delighted to see her again. But then his expression dropped, and he looked to the ground in sadness as he remembered where he was and what he was doing. "No, Saymi, I can't stay. I have to go back." "What do you mean?" Saymi frowned. Silas sent me here to hide me from Alkador while he removes the cherry plant from my soul, Sadier replied. He will call me back. No, don't go, Saymi replied. I have places to show you and people you should know. Perhaps, I guess, Sadier smiled. I could stay perhaps. And wait till night falls, Saymi said. It becomes beautiful here in the city. She showed him a wound that was healing on her arm. A place to call home, Sadier said. Come, I will show you anew, Saymi said, smiling. He rose and walked with her through the trees and the thickets. Sadier saw amazing things, but he wouldn't tell me more than this. I'm so glad it all ended like this, Saymi said. Sadier's head again dropped in sadness. Why are you sad? She asked, grabbing his hand. I'm the student captain my senior year, Sadier replied. Not anymore, Saymi replied, grinning. They're hurting, Sadier said. Their hearts are breaking. They need me in their dreams. The school needs me to be a warrior. A tear came to Saymi's eye. But you just got here, she said. Don't leave me. Tears ran down Sadier's cheeks. I can't begin this life by running from the last, he said. Well, go then, Saymi said sadly. Go and win. A tornado began ripping through the trees towards them. Sila was calling Sadier back. I'm not going to do it, Sadier said. They won't blame me for staying. I'm staying with you, Saymi. I've given everything I have. No, you haven't, Saymi replied. You have to go. The tornado was ripping and churning nearer to Sadier. I'll miss you, Sadier said. I love you. I love you, Saymi replied. It won't be heaven till you're here. Sadier let go of her hand and backed into the tornado, tears exploding from his face. He shot down through the atmosphere to the surface, from the warmth back into the cold, from the light back into the dark, from the freedom back into the pain. He sat up and put his head in his hands and cried loudly, his wails echoing through Galaxy Waterfall's cave. Sila put his hand on Sadier's shoulder and said, I wouldn't have blamed you a bit, my friend. Thank you. You're a champion. Sadier pounded his fists into the dirt and rose, bracing his heart as depression assaulted him. He floated with Sila down the hall of the cave. How can I live here after being there? Sadier asked. It will fuel you, Sila replied. Sadier broke out of the waterfall into the open air and found Adrian sitting by the bank. I'm sorry, bro, Adrian said. It's time for war, Sadier replied. Sadier and Adrian awoke from the upper world and went inside the school. Most of the Alma was gathered there beyond hidden doorways. They were very happy and relieved to see him alive and back to himself. Their affection was very refreshing to him. Valerie made a delicious meal. Sadier was very, very hungry. Looking back on it, I feel bad for doing this because I didn't understand what Sadier was going through. But I went up to him and asked him what he saw across the wall. He was a good sport and told me he would be willing to tell me sometime. One day we met and that's where we started, but he kept going back and told me the whole story, and I wrote it down and comprised the book you are reading. Sadier, Riley, and Ada have been struggling with Naomi for the past couple of nights, Ruben said, setting down an empty bowl of soup. She's in 5th grade. I'm sure you know of her. She has a Sigma reaction on her. She's been crying herself to sleep, telling herself that she's not attractive. Tonight is going to be a big battle. We could definitely use you. Of course, Sadier replied. The sun set and night came. Ani and Sadier drove home. There was a demon in the house when they arrived, but he escaped through a window and ran away. The moon was big and round that night, and so were his big brown eyes reflecting in the bathroom mirror as he brushed his teeth. He and his angel godfather clasped hands in the hallway on their way to bed. Thank you for not leaving, Ani said. Let's go for the kill, Sadier replied. One day at a time, Ani said. Everyone counts. Only so many. See you in a minute, Sadier said, departing for his bedroom. Sadier closed the door and turned off the light. He set the alarm on his phone for 6:39 and plugged it into its charger. He rearranged his pillow and pulled back the covers. He tucked himself in and closed his eyes. Then, after just a few moments, Sadier fell asleep. Saymi slowly opened her eyes. Her heart began pounding anxiously. She lay on a brick street by a brick house. The dim yellow glow of the streetlights shone through the warm, misty rain. Saymi felt a tingle in her left arm and lifted it to examine it. She felt faint as she saw blood mixed with rain running down. She wondered if her leg was broken too, from how it felt. She felt hardly any pain, but she was deeply frightened and began to cry. She looked at her wrist, hoping to radio for help, but her radio was gone. Someone had destroyed it. That's when she noticed the shadow of a figure sitting against the house across the street. "Hi, Saymi," he said. "Do you remember me?" "No," she replied. "I think you do," he replied. "I'm Kane. We met last night. This isn't what you expected, is it?" "I bet he's coming," Saymi said. "Who's coming?" he replied. "Seth. I bet he's coming to rescue me," Saymi said. "I guess we'll see," Kane replied. In the cold, in the dark, in the rain, in the night, her rescuer crept closer.